substance. You gotta come say hi. Yeah. Hello, big boy. Oh, okay. Hey, sweetheart. So, welcome on back, guys. This is Goo, and my name is Jordan. And for this video, we are going to be diving into part 2 of the substance review. Now, we're just kind of going by the chapters in the movie. So, if you haven't seen the first part, check that out. That was Elizabeth's chapter. And for today's video, we're going to be getting into Sue. Now, we aren't going to be discussing it in this video. I'll save it for the third one because that one's just going to be shorter in general. But we will talk about the Substance vinyl soundtrack as well. And I found a forum discussion online that I thought was really interesting about, like, if it were to have been told to us in the film, like, what fragrances Elizabeth and Sue wore. And there was a discussion, so I figured we can go into that a little bit. I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, that's the plan for today. Forewarning, I mean, y'all know this is going to be a long-ass video. Thank you so much for tuning on in, guys. And with that, I think I don't have much else to say. Oh, wait. I need to have the moon on. But yeah, and then I also have the Substance poster that I got at one of the conventions. I think it was the Philadelphia one. He's been in a very lovey mood today. He wasn't last night. Someone was grumpy last night, being a birthday brat. But yeah, so like I said, if you didn't see the first part, go check that out. And then come back to this. Where we left off was Sue was standing in Harvey's office.
I'm Sue.
And her chapter begins right as Sue and Harvey first meet. You might hear him playing off to the side every now and then. Sorry. So, starting right off with Harvey's first impression of Sue, he's like absolutely enamored by her, just gushing for her, it seems. And you can tell that Sue is like really nervous, but she quickly like warms up and she, you know, kind of turns on that giggly, I don't want to say girly because that sounds creepy, but like that's kind of what it is. Like she gives off the energy of someone much younger. And that's probably definitely what plays into, you know, I mean, the casting call had age restrictions and all that. Like, they want someone who is playing into that, you know? I mean, he's like spinning her around, calling her a gorgeous little angel. Like, I don't know. It feels very, I don't want to say immature because I don't think that's the right word. But he's treating her like she's this fragile little thing, you know? I think baby. But Harvey sits down behind his desk and lights up a cigarette, and it's all very vulgar. Every time that Harvey is seen, it's so up close, like when he does stuff, and it's just gross. It's just gross. Even just him lighting up the cigarette, it's like, oh. And then just the smoke filling up the room, like, he definitely smells like just whiskey and cigars. And there was also, like, he just is going off and off about the show and production and all that. He talks to one of the assistants, and he literally changes her name. Like, it's such an absurd scene. He changes it from Isabella to Cindy. He's just like, shorter the better. Sue informs him very nervously that she has to be out of town every other week, says it's to take care of her mother. You can just tell that she thinks like this is going to be a deal breaker for him. And he gets up and moves around, and he's like literally walking through just a thick layer of smoke. Like, he seems really like a villain, you know? I mean, I guess he is the villain in this. I guess. And he gets right in her face and almost angrily says to her that he will do anything to have her on his show. he also, like, he's listing off things. He's like, whether it's for your sick mom or a sick puppy, relating her mom to like a sick dog. Dude. uh, Basically just reaffirming he wants her on the show. They'll work with her no matter what. And then he just keeps kind of gushing about her, but in like it's weird, but you can tell that there is kind of like a separation, you know, like Harvey isn't necessarily inappropriate, but I would say he's definitely uncomfortable to be around. And especially from the perspective of like Elizabeth and Sue, even though Sue wants him to like her and to want her, she's still like very timid with him. But he says to her, gorgeous with a pure heart, the people are going to love that. And she just, you can see it like lights her up on the inside. I would say in the beginning, before Sue starts to really see that validation from the studio and men, more so specifically, she kind of carries the same emotional stature, I guess, as Elizabeth. Very timid, quiet, willing to speak up, but it depends on their reaction. You know what I mean? And then we get such an iconic scene of Sue just walking down the street. The bass is pumping. We'll talk about this when we talk about the vinyl soundtrack, but the soundtrack is so good. It's so good. And it's not like lyrics really, but just like the beat of it all, like, it chef's kiss on the soundtrack. But like men are turning to look at her. So the next scene is day 6, and we see, her do the injection. And in the trash, it's still only the empty capsules. I think this does play into it as the story goes on, like how disposable the remnants of Elizabeth are to Sue, if that makes sense. Like, she needs these things. She needs them to survive. So she takes it from Elizabeth, but once it's done, it's just one of those things that you just throw in the trash and you move on with your day, Like, it's such a crucial thing, but yet at the same time, it's so disposable. Now, it's a lot of kind of like montage scenes, almost very rapid pace. Like, we are being introduced to what the career is starting to look like for this new character. Cut to clips of a photo shoot and Sue seeing her billboard from the apartment where Elizabeth's used to be. It's now big giant billboard for Sue specifically, which, like, who the fuck would want to live looking right at a giant billboard of yourself? Oh my god. But you can see that, like, that alone starts to eat away at Elizabeth, whereas Sue, it feeds her. Like, she wakes up in the morning and she's having her coffee or her tea, doing her yoga, and just looking out over the city that it's like she now symbolically owns, So it's on like nearly the last day where Sue actually shows a bit of care for Elizabeth. Finally puts a towel down under her head because she's just laying on the cold tile of the bathroom for a week. Like, y'all couldn't have a bed or something? It's always back in the bathroom, which is for like the sterile inspection of the body. And then we'll get to that, but like it goes even deeper than that. There's just like a bunch of moving boxes. Sue changes the bed sheets to like a satin pink, I believe. Basically, like, it's Sue's apartment now. So yeah, she puts the towel under Elizabeth's head and brushes hair out of her face, like seemingly really taking care of her in this moment, but then goes and just injects herself. So that care that Sue showed was only because she needed something. She was reminded, oh yeah, I'm relying on this thing, this person, this other part of me. So let me go show it some care. get what I need from it, and then I can go on with my day. So once again, a very quick cut, giving like a Jane Fonda-esque lesson. The styling of the wardrobe also, it's helping to like establish this new life for herself, but it completely disregards Elizabeth. Like all of Elizabeth's stuff is now in boxes away. She's not even going to be a part of society anymore, like a part of the world. She's completely pushed off to the side for this new younger, I keep saying thing because like it feels like a thing, but this new younger version of herself. There's another one of those like flame interludes, and it just like transitions to the like dragon on the back of this really luxurious robe that Sue has. A memory hits Sue, like she hears it, you know, and there's a panning shot of the substance package where it says you switch every 7 days. I do enjoy how for the storyline it works that there are just old flashes of text. Normally in a movie I would be like, but it's reminding us what we need to know. It's reminding us of the rules as the movie goes on. And it's very cut and dry with it, which I appreciate. I like that there is not leeway with it. It establishes its own kind of reality, and that makes the science fiction of it all more believable, you know, like you don't think about it so much. I would say like Infinity Pools is another good example of that. Cronenberg directly, with like the actual process of the like cloning that they do in that movie. It's very cut and dry, very straightforward, but also really fucking trippy and weird. But you somehow don't question that. So Sue gets the ringing in the ear that happens, and we get a panning shot of the food matrix bag, which is running really low. So Sue prepares the switch kit. And once again, like the tasks that they have to do for the substance process, I guess, they all seem so sterile and medical. And the bathroom is just like a perfect place for that. The tile, everything. It is the most sterile room in the house. And it's because that's where Elizabeth does her like most intimate body inspections, I guess. That's where she most intimately reveals to herself who she really is. Sue goes through the process of doing the switch, essentially removing the food matrix, attaching a tube that goes into Elizabeth's arm and her arm, and blood basically just transfers between the two. And then it's a very quick clip of when Elizabeth was watching like the substance instruction video, I guess, or information video, when they have the two clay balls and they smack them back together. It's a great quick cut, and Sue just falls unconscious onto Elizabeth. And then there is a scene of a motorcycle crash, which it's interesting. I'm not quite sure what it could necessarily play into. There is a motorcycle riding character later on, I don't know. But it was a practical effect that they did with like a little mini electric kind of motorcycle toy thing. I don't know. And they put it on a track and ran it into a like glass with the camera behind it. So it's all practical effects, you guys. Like that's the incredible thing. Except for the eye splitting, it's all practical effect. So once the motorcycle crashes head on, then Elizabeth gasps awake. Sue's head was like resting right on Elizabeth's chest, kind of like a mother and child, you know, except like Sue looks so comforted laying there, while Elizabeth is very clearly uncomfortable, gasping for breath. And she's also in a ton of pain, touching her back, which, yeah, that makes sense. Girl, you split right open. It's sad almost, because Elizabeth's back was always something that she showed off so proudly, but it's now, like, unsightly to look at. It's disgusting. Like, the scar is gross. It's just is not fun. So Elizabeth crawls around and she gets the first look at her other self, Sue, brushes her hair off her face, and is a lot more curious than Sue was, who was disgusted at first. She vomited. It once again feels like Elizabeth has so much more care for this younger, more pretty, precious thing, and that pretty, precious thing does not have much care for her. And then we see Elizabeth making herself breakfast, 2 eggs frying in a pan, just like visually reminiscent to everything that we've already seen. But also, it feels like that's Elizabeth, and like they are the eggs in the pan, just like slowly being cooked. And eventually, it's going to come to a point, you know? But she is like hunched over, still eating completely by herself, like hidden away. Looks like she's still in a lot of pain. There's a lot of shots also of Elizabeth in the shower, looking from above down. It's like a contemplative place for Elizabeth. It almost seems like that's where all of her regrets come forward. Whereas for Sue, it's a place of like self-worship almost. And for Elizabeth, it's just self-degradation. But Sue is laying on the floor with the food for other self connected while Elizabeth takes a shower. And then it cuts very quickly to Elizabeth back outside in her yellow coat and glasses, still hidden up. And the noises are so like overstimulating, you know, like you can just tell that Elizabeth's sense of nervousness is heightened now. Like the introduction of this new being that is her is making her even more insecure and aware of those insecurities, which makes sense. Well, hello. Oh, hi. Oh, it's a big boy. Oh, it's a big boy. Hi, Bubbles. Oh, you're a big baby. So, Elizabeth, she gets into the studio hallway that we saw before, the one that's very, like, Shining-esque. And it's, once again, with the red walls, harsh white light. And we see Harvey, who's just kind of, like, very quickly walking by at the far end. And he stops and sees Elizabeth. And he's just shouting obnoxiously. Basically, anything obnoxious this guy can do, he does. But he asks where she's been, and they wanted a drink with her before her departure, which it's all just so, like, kind of condescending, really, how he speaks to her, like she didn't just devote so many years of her life to his company, whatever, and they're just tossing her out. He literally pushes a box of her belongings into her arms, and he's digging through all of her stuff, saying we all chipped in for a gift, and it was to keep her busy. I also wrote down the quote because he hands to her what looks like it's in the shape of a book, but it's wrapped up like a gift, and he just says, "It's French. My wife swears by it." So 1, ruining the gift on what it is. But 2, it's so impersonal. You're just getting it simply because another woman enjoys it. But he, like, very frantically looks at his watch and leaves, and just, he's so arrogant, like, oh, Harvey. Harvey's like the perfect villain for this movie, because like he isn't a villain, but he is, just as like Elizabeth and Sue, they're not good or bad, but they just kind of like tread that line every now and then. But Harvey is very much like set out to be the story's kind of like bad guy, and it's more so just like everything that Harvey represents is what makes him bad. And Elizabeth is just staring as he walks off. Okay, I also wrote down when dealing with Elizabeth, Harvey is by himself. When Sue is with Harvey, he's with others. And I wrote trying to impress. I'm not sure if that's what it is. Like, I don't think Harvey aims to impress Sue himself, but it's almost like he's using her to impress them, I think is more so what it is. Like, as much as Elizabeth is just a tool for Sue to reach a higher point, Harvey's using Sue in that same way to get a higher status from his higher ups. I wrote down like little questions for myself as I was going through this movie, so I'm trying to answer them as I get to them. Sometimes like you take these notes and looking back you're just like, what the fuck was I talking about? So Elizabeth is back in the apartment and she's marking on the calendar the days for her and days for Sue. Basically it's every other week. And there's a lot of very interesting like transition scenes in this movie as well. It's not at all like Hereditary, but Hereditary has amazing transition scenes. This movie does too. One specifically is when Elizabeth is back in her home and she's sitting in the living room with the portrait just kind of like staring over her shoulder, and she turns on the TV and her clicking through the channels is in the transition from like night to day that we see. And then we basically just kind of see the monotony of Elizabeth's life. She's back in the shower, the exact same pose, hunched over, showing the scar on her back, eating all alone, going through her mail. And then there's an envelope from the company that does the substance. What would it be called? The company. And it says your refill kit has been delivered. I also love how it like has little mini ones in there. It says to your deposit box. Like, it specifies in small necessary ways, and then in others it's just like open-ended and like the characters just somehow know. I think with science fiction, that works really well. I don't think science fiction is one of those things where like you have to be as real as possible because then there's going to be like these holes and stuff. I don't think that's important. I think science fiction, if it's done really well, is able to suspend that disbelief that the audience would have. So Elizabeth's back in her yellow trench coat, going to pick up her next refill. And as these shots of her going to like pick up again continue, they get like more frantic. They seem a lot choppier, rougher, and it's very quick too. This time she just picks up the box and goes right home, setting all the supplies aside. We just get more intimate looks into Elizabeth's life, and Elizabeth's life kind of like after she's moved on from what she once was. And I think it's more so like a state of limbo. Like, Elizabeth doesn't know what to do next. She has no idea, so she's just going to kind of let Sue carry on and do the next thing for her instead of doing it herself. But we see her watching TV all alone at night, and we even see her starting to get impatient with the 7-day process. Like, she doesn't want to wait. She wants to do the switch now and not have to experience what she's experiencing, her loneliness. But there is a great transition scene where the fridge then opens and we see Sue reaching in for a crisp cold Diet Coke. Now, usually I'm not a fan of like super freaking obvious product placement like this. I was talking about it with my friend the other night. We were watching a show actually, and they were like doing basically a commercial for Tums within the show. Even like set it down, label out on the desk. Like, it was so purposeful. And I was just talking about that. I was like, see, that's very obvious fucking product placement. And this is too. It's very blatant and in your face. But I love it. I love it. Plus, Diet Coke, cunt. Like, what baddie doesn't love a freaking ice cold Diet Coke? Well, first she places the stabilizer in there and then takes the Diet Coke out. That is important. It adds to the camp kind of it. And Sue also sees kind of like traces of Elizabeth's nightly activities, her just kind of like binge eating in front of the TV. Sue, at this point, looks more like embarrassed for Elizabeth, like sympathetic almost. But there's still a judging there. She's still judging her. And we'll see how that develops more so. I do think this movie talks about like the relationship that people have with food in general, but I think also specifically the like kind of societal narrative that's pushed on women with food. Well, hello. You snuck up on me. Hi, misters. How you doing? So, Sue goes into the bathroom and sees Elizabeth, and the wound on her back is like somewhat healing, you know, slowly. And during this kind of like collection of scenes, I guess, it's not like super important, so we're just going to kind of skim through a little, but it's Sue moving out basically everything Elizabeth and turning it into her space, which, you know, is very bold and it's very bold of Sue to be doing this second week. And it's just like that kind of symbolic, like even Elizabeth herself, because Sue is a part of her, is pushing her aside. And it's sad just knowing that it all ties back into Elizabeth's own feelings about herself. But this is when like the final transformation of the apartment really happens, is when she does bust through the bathroom door or wall, the bathroom wall, and creates another area of seclusion, which also totally unrealistic to be doing in an apartment complex, obviously. But it's very kind of like symbolic of how the space where Elizabeth and Sue does the most like examining of themselves, and now we're busting through that and into a darker, more like recessed kind of place within Elizabeth's own mind. And that's where like the other goes when it's not their week. Feels very symbolic, like this deeper, darker place. And Sue is like welding, like she's 2 weeks out the womb and she's welding. Okay. But a funny scene that happens is around this point. A neighbor comes knocking on the door. He's just complaining that like he hasn't slept in 3 nights, and he's super pissed and banging on the door, thinking that it's Elizabeth Sparkle that still lives there. And then when Sue opens it, his tone very quickly changes. That's like your first instance of like, oh, this guy's... Because he was willing to be so vulgar and so mean to Elizabeth, but as soon as, you know, the pretty little Sue opens the door, then it's all fine and dandy. Then he's like, oh, do you want to grab a drink? I don't know, does he actually specifically say that? Anyways, Sue says Elizabeth had moved out. He does offer his help plus a big hammer, and Sue isn't very impressed by that. And then we also kind of get like a funny scene of there's a lot of almost comical scenes of their just unconscious bodies being dragged through this apartment. But she drags Elizabeth's body into that like secondary room within the bathroom, and there's like 2 days of food left. And that's when she hides Elizabeth behind this like false door, and it's like her embarrassment of Elizabeth now makes her shun her, like push her to the back of her mind, essentially pushing her to the back of the bathroom. And the room is just so dark and empty and cold. Like, it shows the lack of care, really. But then it all reflects back to this is how Elizabeth feels about herself. Elizabeth to herself is just a throwaway object in comparison to Sue. And that is also when Sue drags the giant portrait of Elizabeth out of the living room. Every trace of Elizabeth from that point is locked up. And then this is when we get to see like the Pump It Up filming, like the show that Sue is doing for Harvey. And like it's very hypersexual, hyper glamorized. It's kind of like Jane Fonda, but Jane Fonda meets like Hooters maybe, but even Hooters wasn't that like ugh. But a lot of the shots focus on women's butts and like the super hot stage lights, and we get more of that kind of like spectator camera lens thing. It's just the camera lens focusing in and out, but it has such a presence in the film, and when that gets busted out, it's just like you feel the eyes, you know? And there are a lot of snippets of that like focusing giant camera lens, like a giant eyeball, and Sue's like little signal off, her closer. It's really cute. Like,
and in the meantime, take care of yourself.
like it's cute, yes. It's obviously very ironic with how she is treating herself back home. And then Harvey comes out, he's cheering, blah, 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 very obnoxious. The crew are applauding, the execs are in the background, and Sue leaves the soundstage going into that Shining-esque hallway, and she stops to look at posters of herself now. Before, when it was Elizabeth, it was her and many other women behind her, but now it's just solely Sue. It does jump a little bit to Sue getting ready, putting on this really cute little cat suit. Like, Margaret Qualley looks so good. And I love how certain aspects of this movie are shot, and just like kind of the theming of it. Like, it feels like a video game. And I love that. It's very graphic. It's very not necessarily like coherent in the way that a normal movie would be when it comes to these shots just being like interjected into the film, but it works so well. She pulls on thigh-high Louboutins. Bitch came to play. Like, and she goes into the secret room where Elizabeth is, and she says, "I won't be long, so just wait for me." And she checks the food bag and says, "Don't eat too fast." The lack of care in the first part, but then that almost like enjoyment out of making herself suffer for her own enjoyment. Elizabeth is one of those characters that like you just can't help but feel terribly sorry for. Even like you might, I don't know, I found myself getting really upset with both of them at different points, but then with the rewatch, I reminded myself again, like, they are the same person. So like every flaw that one has is going to be juxtaposed in a similar way or in a completely different way in the other. And they're both, you know, two sides of the same coin. That makes the conversation much deeper, makes both of the characters more complex, but I think in general just makes Elizabeth overall more complex. When you think about it that way, Elizabeth is really one of the only characters in this movie, other than Harvey and some of the other people. That's getting real, like, with it, but... but after Sue says that, she closes that door, and there's just a little grate, and you can hear and just barely see Sue walking out of the bathroom, just leaving Elizabeth there in the dark. It's scary, but also really sad. And she climbs into the back of a Mustang, drives off. She's living her Hollywood life, okay? However, as the night goes on, Elizabeth starts to run out of food and is like sucking the bag dry. Peppa Buzz. You're gonna lay down right there. And Sue, like, with the growing of her, like, distaste for Elizabeth, also herself, it comes with, like, more abuse and neglect of Elizabeth as well. Like, abuse of the elderly from the younger generations. And it's really sad. Like, there's moments in this where you really feel bad for the both of them, you know? Like, Sue being ridiculed by the powers that be, you know, in the industry. And then also Elizabeth then having that done to her by the industry and then by what's supposed to be herself as well. It's heartbreaking. As Elizabeth is laying naked, just uncovered in this, feels so cold, in this cold feeling bathroom, you can hear that Sue brings someone back home. And she's very assertive and dominant in that encounter, we'll say, interaction. It gets pretty heated. But I will say, like, the braid and the cat suit with the heels, it's just like, it's kind of giving dominatrix vibes. Just a bit. I could totally see that as being like Sue's night gig. But as the guy is unzipping Sue's cat suit, Elizabeth starts to run out of food, and Sue gets that really sharp, like, pain in her ear, and her nose starts to bleed onto the guy. She stumbles away, says she's fine, she'll be right back, runs to the bathroom. And as she sees Elizabeth, like, starving away, basically, like, you know when you suck on a Capri Sun pouch, and if you, like, really keep going, it'll just, like, close in on itself? That's what was happening to the bag, not to Elizabeth. That'd be crazy. And then the words, "you switch every 7 days," flashes on the screen once again without exception. I love these little, like, reminders. Usually I wouldn't like being reminded this many times of something that we've already seen, but, like, it makes sense and it works. I don't know, there's so much, like, this is kind of a conventional movie in some instances, but in others it's very unconventional. I think where it's unconventional is where it's its strongest. I mean, duh. But Sue goes digging into the trash and pulls out, like, one of the used stabilizer pods. And she sticks a used needle into the red, irritated sore on Elizabeth's back. And as Sue is drawing more out, you can see that it's physically causing both her more pain and Elizabeth, because, like, you can see it in her eyes how terrified she is. So Sue stabilizes herself and goes back to sitting on the guy's lap, and he says that she looks even more beautiful than before. So backhanded. And she just kisses him and continues on, ignores it. And then as he goes to unzip the cat suit, it's such a gross practical effect, but he unzips it, and basically a giant, nasty pile of bloody intestines, organs, bunch of stuff, kind of like prolapses out of her back. And, like, right as it hits the floor is when Elizabeth, like, jolts awake, and she's, like, gasping for air while Sue is laying beside her. And I don't know, I find it interesting. They're always completely in the dark and completely nude. Seems like the vulnerability, almost, maybe. But Elizabeth throws on a robe and stumbles on into the bathroom, and she sees the mess that Sue made of the apartment and the changes as well, like the big time changes. I think by now at this point, like, the carpet is pink, like, there's very little remnants of Elizabeth still there. And she finds a sticky note on the window from the guy, but he's more concerned with his helmet, which he left there. And when Elizabeth lifts her hand to grab the note, she realizes that her finger is now like deformed. She runs to the bathroom, tries like washing her hands, trying to scrub it off, but it's there. It's like a, I don't want to sound like ageist by saying this, but it looks like a old like witch's finger, you know, very exaggerated. And Elizabeth takes off her robe and sees that the like hole on her back is much more infected and just red and sore. Not good. So she calls the substance hotline while staring like angrily at Sue's billboard, which is right in front of her apartment. But she says, yes, hi, this is Elizabeth Sparkle. Complete silence. I'm 503. Yes. Just like, I don't know. Again, I think it's showing that Elizabeth still prioritizes like the ideal ego, the ideal idea of Elizabeth Sparkle over, you know, just the baseline being a patient, I guess, to this service. But this is such a funny scene, like how cut and dry it is, and the goop and gag. So she basically says there was a slight misuse of the substance. A few extra hours were accidentally used, causing an alteration. And then the changing perspectives in this scene as well also really helps to push like the anxiety and suspicion that we're now starting to have for Elizabeth's character, and almost maybe not a suspicion, but like we're realizing her own lack of accountability in this moment. And she says, so I'm just looking for the procedure to reverse it. And she says it like gleefully, like it's just to be expected. The man on the other line says, what has been used on one side is now long lost on the other side. There is no going back. Elizabeth scoffs and insists she, Sue, was drunk and didn't know what she was thinking. And he interrupts, remember, there is no she and you. You are one. Respect the balance and you won't have any more inconveniences. Hangs up. And it's going to get even better. Like, substance hotline man, whoever you are, shady diva. But Elizabeth angrily gets up from that single chair in the kitchen and walks over to the note, ripping it off the window, throwing it in trash and the helmet into the hallway. And there's a shot of Elizabeth cleaning, but it's from the kitchen. So it's divided into like two squares essentially. And in one square, you see where Elizabeth's photo used to be, that giant one. And then in the other square, it's Elizabeth cleaning up after Sue, with Sue looming in the background in the billboard. I thought this was a really like interesting visual setup, because for me, I wrote down the presence of Sue stays looming over her. She stops vacuuming to see Pump It Up airing on TV. It's like Sue is this ever consuming presence for Elizabeth now. But as they're showing the TV, you know, the Pump It Up, it doesn't show Sue's face, just her body, but like Elizabeth knows. Like she just knows that it's her, Sue. And Sue does her, I guess, famous, her iconic signature. Like kiss and a wink, almost kind of like smugly directly to Elizabeth, sitting in her chair watching. And Elizabeth uses her deformed finger to turn off the TV, staring just angrily. Like this is where we really see the resentment start to form, which I guess rightfully so. You're fucking yourself over. You have a right to be resentful. So like I get it, but also this is where accountability would be really handy. But Elizabeth looks out the peephole and sees that it's that neighbor guy calling eagerly for Sue, saying he just saw her on TV and was asking like very weirdly about a private lesson, asked her to have a drink at his place. And he says, come on, don't be shy. I see you standing there behind the door, gorgeous. Like, creepy. Fucking creepy. Also, a lot of the men that we see are through like a distorted perspective, which just makes you feel even more uneasy about them. And he basically, without her saying anything, confirms the date and dances on back to his apartment. Whatever. But it cuts to Elizabeth then in the shower. You can see her hair is just looking messier. Like it's instead of like being pulled to the side with the water running down it, it's now like sticking to her shoulders and her back. And she's leaning on the wall and she seems to be crumbling as Sue thrives more. And I also notice in this scene that all four walls of the shower are tile now, so it's like she's stuck in there. It's not just a shower, it's like she's trapped in that mentality. Elizabeth gets notified that her refill is ready for her, and then once again she makes the journey in the yellow trench coat with the red gloves. But she hears noises as she's reaching for the box this time, so she very quickly just grabs it, runs out of there, and she goes into a nearby small diner and sits down at a booth, looks around, and then decides to move to a booth even further back. She's just like super paranoid right now. She takes off the glasses and one glove before she remembers her finger. The waitress startles her, asking her for her order. She, like I said, the anxiety level is really high, and the way that this is filmed too, like the choppiness of her actions throughout it adds to that. But she orders a mocha latte. And a like random man, not random, we'll find out, but he looks over at her and says, "It's long, isn't it?" That would freak me the fuck out. Oh my god. And then he says 7 days, like it's The Ring or something. 7 days, and shows like the same exact liver spot almost. I don't think that's what it is, but that's what it looks like. No, that's what it is. She gets covered with liver spots later on. It's a liver spot on her hand. But he has one too in the exact same spot. And he drops his belongings and a card that says 207. And he has a scar up his back. So we know 1,000% this guy is also a user of the substance, I guess. She reflects back to the nurse with the light blue eyes from the beginning who, slipped her the little thing. And Elizabeth asks if he's been following her. And he just wanted to check in and see how it's going. It can get lonely, he says. Elizabeth plays clueless, like she doesn't want to acknowledge their similarities, doesn't want to connect because she isn't like him. Visually, like, you can tell Elizabeth isn't there yet, but Elizabeth is also going to, like, completely jump where that old guy is and go straight to monstrosity. So we'll see. But again, that just like refusal to accept it's Elizabeth's own like inner hatred for herself and her own aging. It's sad. It's sad. It all loops back to just like how sad of a character Elizabeth actually is. He says, "It gets hard each time to remember that you still deserve to exist." It's actually really sad. As Elizabeth is frantically getting up, the man yells, "Has she started it yet? Eating away at you?" Oh my god. This feels like top tier paranoia. Like something like this in an alien movie. What is it? Return of the Body Snatchers or whatever. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, They Live, like stuff like that. It would go so well with that. So she's like terrified, frantically runs out of there and actually ends up running into Motorcycle Guy, who yells at her and is like so rude and almost like borderline violent. Like he's ready to be violent with her. Like absolutely zero regard for her, but he's absolutely enamored by Sue. Go figure. But Elizabeth gets home and finds boxes of her things in the closet labeled Elizabeth's old junk. And finds a letter from the high school pal Fred, last person to really validate her beauty, and she holds it close to her heart, literally like skin to note. So she decides to call Fred and has a nice little convo with him. This is like a genuinely good interaction in this movie. I'm glad there was like at least one semi-good one. Like, we thought, oh, this guy's a little weird in the beginning, but like, no, later on you realize Fred was actually like one of the good ones. Maybe he could have been. We'll get to that. But at the same time, it was kind of just replaying him validating her beauty for her, and I think that's more so what she wanted rather than actually Fred, you know what I mean? But asks if he'd like to grab a drink, and he's shocked and makes reservations. And she genuinely seems like happy and giddy. We really haven't seen this side of her in the movie, and it's nice to see. But she zips up like a very structured cocktail dress, one that now hides her back completely, which was something she showed off before. And she's got on these like gorgeous black silk gloves, and she's doing her makeup in the mirror, and Elizabeth feels like a girl again, you know? It feels like first date kind of like energy, you know? But then it almost seems like a compulsive need to pick herself apart, because she would close the mirror and start inspecting herself, adds more makeup on as we see the time like ticking away. So she still has on her yellow trench coat, and she grabs her car keys and again is stopped by Sue's image, the billboard right outside her window. And now she's closely inspecting Sue, going from inspecting yourself to inspecting someone that you're envious of. You're inherently going to compare yourself, you know? And then that's when she goes to the bathroom again. She tries pulling her dress up more. She covers herself with a scarf, which is blue, and she wipes away her lipstick, having to touch up her foundation, and she's just unraveling. We can see that her own insecurities against this younger version of herself is literally unraveling her. But time just keeps ticking away, and Elizabeth reaches for the doorknob to leave, but she just hesitates. And once again, we see Sue literally looming over her shoulder, and she just sees her own distorted image of herself in the doorknob. And so she goes back to the bathroom and begins to just wipe off the makeup, smearing it, you know, across her face. It's kind of an iconic scene. It's like female rage is something that is not often beautifully depicted, but I think in this case it's very sad, because, I mean, male or female, you can understand that, just like comparing that, those insecurities that naturally come to people. But I think for Elizabeth it's something much deeper, because she's almost like pulling and pushing her face to try to distort it to how bad she feels. Like, Elizabeth is not a not beautiful woman, but compared to Sue in her own mind, she's a monster in comparison. And that is what like eats away at her. She almost wants that to be the reality so that she can validly hate Sue, it seems. But then it's a very sharp cut again to her just sitting in the dark, and like notifications on her phone going off. And it's really sad, honestly. Like, it's sad. You see the struggle, you know? Well, hello. The big boy. Hi, handsomes. So after the notifications ringing scene, then we do see the fridge open again. Pretty much the same shot that you saw when Sue opened the fridge, but now it's like half-eaten food, moldy food, and Elizabeth grabs the moldy food like she's gonna eat it. It's just very obvious that she isn't doing well at the moment. But then it very quickly cuts again to Sue gleefully walking onto set for the day. And they're filming, for the Pump It Up show. Very provocative choreo. They specifically add in the shots of the camera, zooming when you see a shot of a more, let's say, intimate part of Sue, a sexualized part of Sue. It's that voyeurism aspect again. It just always keeps popping up as a continuing motive. But then all of a sudden something protrudes from Sue's hip, like a big lump just kind of bulges out. I don't know how to describe it. But she freaks out and ruins the take. But then she quickly notices that the lump isn't there anymore. She stutters and blames it on being distracted. And the director from the control room calls a halt and says they saw something weird on the monitor. And you just feel Sue's dread in this moment. The anxiety during this scene is really, really high. And it gets gross afterwards, but we'll talk about that. They ask for a replay on camera 2, and Sue glances over, seeing that camera directly focused on her backside. Ooh. This also feels like a body checking thing, taking someone's insecurity and blasting it onto a giant screen for everyone to huddle around and watch. Such an anxiety moment. And you feel that dread that she has, thinking about being perceived in a abnormal way. At this point, Sue snaps at an attendant to get her dressing gown as her body is being scrutinized. So now all of a sudden, Sue feels the need to cover up and to hide her body. And they're taking it frame by frame. The tension in this scene is so high. She gets her robe and she says she needs 5 minutes and storms out of the studio into the hallway. She locks herself in the dressing room and feels a hard lump in the side of her butt. It's more kind of up towards her hip, but it's still in that region, you know what I mean? And it's almost kidney shaped. It looks like an organ that just kind of fell out of place. And she starts pushing it up underneath her skin. It's hard to describe, but she's literally trying to position it back into her body. But she pushes it into her stomach area and then reaches into her belly button. Now this is where you're gonna have to really suspend your disbelief. And she pulls out a chicken wing leg. I think it's a leg. I'm not sure on the specifics. I believe it's a drumstick that she pulls out. It's gross. But as she pulls the chicken leg out, Sue wakes up from it was all a nightmare. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this kind of trope in movies. I hate watching something and then having all of that emotional payoff, I guess, be for nothing because it was all just a dream. But this works. You're getting a look into the psyche and how they're now kind of at war with each other between Elizabeth and Sue. She wakes up from the horrible nightmare after Elizabeth makes the switch in the bathroom, and Elizabeth has a slight grin on her face. She knows that she's sabotaged Sue's psyche a little bit. So Sue walks out of the bathroom and sees discarded food in front of the TV, chicken bones, and dumps all in the trash. And a lot of the stuff revolving around food does feel like maybe not necessarily a full conversation on eating disorders, but I think definitely like the societal perception of women's eating habits, women's weight, stuff like that. But also maybe that like internalized fight as well. It happens later on, but you see that Sue longs for that type of like freedom and unrestriction that Elizabeth has. Like they both want some aspect of what the other has, but you know, they can't have it. Actually, it's right now when it's that like Sue also doesn't feel like she's getting everything out of this experience. She calls the substance hotline, and says the balance isn't working. She's barely had any time and to enjoy herself. All work, no play makes Sue a dull girl. And then she specifically says while she wastes 7 days stuffing her face in front of the TV. She's very angry that Elizabeth gets to just do whatever, and Sue is now the one that's being put to work. But the substance dude says there is no she and you, and Sue just angrily hangs up. And I mean, I find it interesting. It's that dichotomy of this character again, where like Sue is mad, perceiving that Elizabeth just gets to do whatever. She's having the greatest time of her life. Whereas Elizabeth seems to be really fucking struggling. It doesn't seem like the vacation that Sue sees it as. Another day passes and Sue walks into the studio and sees the set being taken down. One of the stagehands, I guess, says that the taping was canceled, and someone comes and tells Sue that Harvey wants to see you in his office. Immediately. Add that in there. Immediately. And the tension just keeps peaking for Sue. Like, I would say first the scrutiny shot, like that, analyzing her body, that kind of marked like a real serious shift. It's like she was so praised and adored before, but now like they're starting to pick away at her slowly, which is presumably what also happened to Elizabeth. So when she gets up to Harvey's office, there are men all over the room, and he just does kind of like the classic, like, I don't know, mobster turning around, smoking a cigarette, and he says, "I'll get right to the point. We can't keep you on the morning show." Sue begins to like shake and gets real teary-eyed. She asks why. She just started, and Harvey begins to chuckle and says ratings are through the roof. Like, as stereotypical as you think Harvey can be, that's exactly how he is. And Sue wipes her tears away, and Harvey doubles down that the people want more of you. And he asks her to host the New Year's Eve show. And Sue is absolutely shocked. It's the highest rated show on their network. You can't go any higher than that. And then Sue gives almost like a sinister kind of grin as Harvey asks if she's in on the event, I guess. I don't think this is the right word, but like what right would Sue have to say to turn down Harvey? Like, it's what Sue wants the most. So it's almost like the executives, at least, the people in power, know that this is what this person wants. So she'll be willing to do anything to get it. Now, this is when we start to like slip into madness, I would say. Sue opens the door to that like secret bathroom where Elizabeth is. And as she goes and takes more stabilizer from Elizabeth's back, she says, "If you don't answer the door when opportunity knocks, you might not get another chance. You of all people know this." I don't know, feels a little gaslighty. Like, I don't know. It's hard to kind of like break apart really the motive of it all between the two characters. Not like Sue has the motive of wanting to be famous and all of this. It's like the complete disregard for Elizabeth from Sue, and that selfishness as well. And multiple days and vials go by. Sue is absolutely draining Elizabeth. The wound on her back is like festering with pus and bruised, and like Sue has to force the needle into it. It's disgusting. Disgusting. Like I said, the medical horror of this movie, I would say, is like some of the strongest stuff besides like the psychological aspects of it. And as we continue to watch Sue do this, weeks are now going by. Sue stumbles into the bathroom gleefully. We're doing the cover of Vogue. And she takes more and is like, just one more day, okay? And you can see the fear building up in Elizabeth's eyes. She's entirely powerless to this. And who knows when it's going to let up, honestly. Plus, we know now what happens when you take too much. We're about to see. And the wound on Elizabeth's back, you see it so many times. It's disgusting. It's just so gross. You know, we see Sue relaxing in the bed, and it very quickly cuts to, I wrote down the clone door. That like secondary room in the bathroom. All of a sudden, we just hear Elizabeth breathe in and let out just a guttural scream. And we haven't been revealed to the horror just yet. But you can just hear the physical pain that Elizabeth is now in. We are then given a shot of Elizabeth in the shower, and it's a kind of like a panning shot of her legs, and you see bright blue veins leading to what is very clearly a deformed leg. It's very hyperbolic, so I don't necessarily feel bad saying deformed, but I do think we should recognize that like it's an exaggerated caricature of a elderly body, and I think they push it just far enough into that like other realm where like it's okay, but it is an obvious critique of like this exaggerated version that people see in their heads when it comes to bodies as they age, and you know, that kind of like rhetoric. Her arm is also like deformed, her hair is thinning, and by this point the hair also already started to like go gray. It was more so like she was just kind of giving up on the maintenance of her look, but now, you know, it's something else. And Elizabeth ends up calling the substance number again, and she says she didn't respect the balance, and she yells it. She's stealing more and more time from me, completely without consideration for the consequences. She's a selfish bitch. I don't know, it's just funny a little bit how like quickly the claws come out, but it is kind of a prolonged thing. And the substance person representative asks, so would you like to stop? That seems to surprise Elizabeth at first. Like, oh, it almost got too real there, you know? Like, she doesn't want it to stop. She just wants Sue to do what she wants her to do. And, well, that's an issue. And then she very quietly asks, stop? And they say, you are the Matrix. If you're not satisfied, you can put an end to the experience. And Elizabeth stops to really contemplate this, if she wants to go back to living on her own. She asks if things will go back to how it was, but what has been done is done. And, you know, she's stuck as she is, so she almost views it as like, well, I can't go back even if I wanted to now. We might as well carry through. Because she still gets a sense of validation from Sue and seeing how successful Sue is. Even though there is that divide, like, she still feeds off of the attention that Sue gets. Because it's her, but like, you know, it gets a little confusing. But Elizabeth looks at her now very like irregular, mismatching feet and lets out a very gaspy no, shaking her head, and admits she can't stop. She's hooked, and Elizabeth starts slapping herself as she remembers "You Are One," like that motive, that headline, whatever, pops up multiple times. And Elizabeth says, the balance just needs to be respected. And The dude on the line says, just very flatly, so respect it, and hangs up. And she is gooped and gagged. This is the part that I was talking about that has really good comedy. And she keeps hitting herself in the head, telling Sue to stop it repeatedly. And then the camera pans to a note on the fridge that says, "It changed my life," which I believe is from Sue. So it's just that further validating the wants and desires of both of these characters. So real quick, I know it's a little bit of a different setup again. It's a different day. I had to cut this up a lot, actually. But I did happen to get this cool VHS. Now, I'm gonna be so for real. I don't know if it has the movie on it. I have a VHS player. It's at my parents', so I'm gonna get that because this would be cool. But it's The Substance on VHS. Like, dope. But yeah, jumping right back in, guys. So some time passes and we see Elizabeth hunched in a chair watching game shows late at night. She notices a gift on her bookshelf and she attempts to get up, but you can see like it's so physically painful for her. And she has to like force or like pop her knee to like get it to unbend, and it's just it's a very physically painful scene. And she goes and picks up the French cooking book that Harvey gave to her, and she looks through the pages with like a bit of intrigue but also kind of just general disgust.
Fuck.
The food is very like over the top, like foie gras and just rich like organs and stuff like that. And this is when we get it's kind of funny, kind of iconic scene of Elizabeth in the kitchen cooking up all this crazy food, watching Sue on a late night talk show giving an interview, and them like having a conversation back and forth with each other.
Yes, that's right.
Yes, that's right.
Sue is like dissing on Elizabeth and being real shady towards her.
I can't really say that I actually watched her show.
And then Elizabeth, of course, is like, "You wouldn't even be if it wasn't for me," which obviously symbolic to older stars that have paved the way for a newer, younger generation, and also the fact that obviously Sue comes from Elizabeth. And Elizabeth just begins to like mock Sue. Like I said, it's funny, but it's also like not. You always, like I said, you always keep it in the back of your mind that like she's essentially just talking to herself. Also, I thought that it was very intentional that they focus on foie gras specifically, just how that's created, the act of fattening a bird to eat. It almost feels like that's what Elizabeth is trying to almost do. There's blood sausages and organ meat. And Elizabeth is kind of now, I would say, more clearly very unhinged, kind of driven mad by her own jealousy and also her own self-hatred. And she very quickly turns around when she hears her name mentioned. Like, you know, that part of her, it was like just waiting to hear. And as Sue begins to like very obviously diss Elizabeth is like brutalizing this chicken. It's a chicken, I believe, on the counter. That's when we kind of get the little bit iconic Jurassic Fitness line. Elizabeth is like ripping organs out of this bird as clips of Sue's body is being shown. Like she's imagining herself just tearing Sue apart. And that is when Elizabeth also says, "You wouldn't even exist without me," which seems to be almost like a bit of a common trope with, I'm gonna say jealous. Maybe a little bit of jealousy, but like, yeah, maybe it is jealous people that came before others You know, it feels like trying to knock them down a little bit of a peg because they might have surpassed you. And when Sue is asked what her beauty secret is, Elizabeth rips open her robe.
Say it! Tell them who your little beauty secret is!
I guess
Why don't we just show them right here?
And she says, "Say it! Say it! Tell them who your little beauty secret is." She's throwing eggs at the screen, and she then, like, she's gone full, just kind of crazy, almost. She uses egg whites ugh, to cover the like large window with newspaper. So a little bit of time does pass, and Elizabeth is wearing Sue's like fire dragon robe and mocking her more in front of her mirror in the bathroom. Back to that like self-scrutinizing. Now that she's scrutinizing herself, or Sue, it's back into the bathroom. And Elizabeth almost like starts to talk to Sue inside of herself, staring at herself in the mirror. And we see her then laying in the shower, hitting her head on the floor, repeating, "Stop it." From that, the shot is the camera is moving upwards, and we see that the shower is now just like a tall, cramped box with no escape. Like before we saw that like, oh, the door's gone, so it's like she's trapped in there, but now it's like she's sinking into this deeper, darker place. And then that's also when we get it's a bit of a jump scare. Honestly, the first time that it came up, I was like, ooh, okay. It's Sue yelling directly into the camera, but like it's just her mouth, I believe. I'll insert a clip of it.
Control yourself!
And there's more like panning shots of the kitchen, which is just a complete mess. And Elizabeth is basically living in squalor. The living room windows are covered in newspaper. Food is everywhere. And Sue is basically taking her frustration for Elizabeth out on her, calling her fat and old, and their hatred for each other, or like jealousy, grows. Because I do think there could be an argument of like, well, what would Sue be jealous about? I think it's more so the fact that she has to rely on Elizabeth. She hates that fact. You know, it's no longer like a partnership thing. It's me against her. Almost. Not almost, that is what it is. But also at the same time, that motive of like, it's me against her is kind of a falsehood, a fallacy. Like, it's not real. That competitiveness between women that is portrayed in Hollywood, I would say specifically Hollywood, but it trickles down into smaller social situations, you know? But that like competitiveness against each other, when really it's a bigger thing than just the individual, you know? I don't know if that like portrays what I'm necessarily thinking, but like that competitiveness that is not really real is what consumes Elizabeth. And then Sue's like own hatred for Elizabeth goes from like taking several days of stabilizer all at once, filling up extra jars, and basically just draining Elizabeth completely. We actually get like a major time jump in the movie this late on. I would say it's this late on. 3 months later, and we have a ad for the New Year's Eve show, which is tomorrow at 9 p.m. There are roses on the table with a note that says break a leg. They are going to love you. Kind of reiterating the sentiment from Harvey. And Sue keeps draining Elizabeth all through this. So we are to assume that the 3 months straight, Sue has just been draining Elizabeth. We saw how bad it got after she did it once. And then a couple times. But a full like 3 months. Ooh. But when Sue goes to drain more out, it comes out like grainy and black. It almost looks like coffee grounds. And Sue calls the substance hotline saying there's an emergency, there's no more stabilizer, there's silence. And then she snaps as her nose begins bleeding. And the hotline provider, the substance guy, says it means you reached the end. You must let fluid refill to continue. Her New Year's Eve show is tomorrow, so of course, you know, she needs it. She falls and struggles to the bathroom, falling all over the place, and she wakes up a guy. There's a guy in her bed. Also, mind you, yes, there is a man, I guess like a boyfriend. And she does make it to the bathroom and manages to switch right in time. And Elizabeth wakes up gasping, and you can hear like she's having a hard time breathing. And you see what looks like old, veiny, almost deformed feet stumbling out and rushes to lock the door before this guy comes and sees what's happening. And there are a lot of close-ups of her deformed body. Now this is all like prosthetic work on Demi Moore. Love. The guy that's there, he sees drops of blood on the floor and makes reference to, quote, her lady business. There's also like a juxtaposing shot of her backside and then his right outside the bathroom. I just thought it was funny. I was like, man ass, okay, right there. She turns and sees herself in the mirror, and you can just see that she is like burning with rage. And she tells the man to go away. He's like, what the fuck? And you can see there's like, I don't know, she's spitting up like stuff. And he runs out of the apartment. Elizabeth opens the door and she tries to walk out. And she is so physically weak that she just like falls flat. And she stumbles into the living room and calls the substance. She is struggling to speak. Like everything that she does, even breathing, seems physically painful. Very good, like, concept of leading into Nosferatu. And Elizabeth is crying that she wants to stop. This is like a very, very heartbreaking moment that does shift, but it's very sad to see the consequences of her actions, I guess. But it's hard to always keep that thought that, like, they are together. They're the same. So, like, there's no good or bad guy in the scenario because they're both the same person. It's hard to keep that in the back of your head sometimes. And she drags the giant photo of herself from before back into the living room. She's almost like reclaiming her space, but she's remorseful. And she's now covering herself head to toe for pickup. So she does have to go pick up the termination kit. That's why she's going to the Dropbox location again. But as she opens the door, her weird-ass neighbor from before is out there. And he pops out asking for Sue, and Elizabeth just screams, "Fuck off!" It's such a fucking good scene. There's some real good comedy in this movie as well. And I think the ending, a lot of people don't like the ending or like that bloodbath scene. I thought it was so heavy metal. Like, this movie kind of has that vibe a bit. A little bit. You know what I'm talking about? Like, there's just some movies, some shows out there that have that heavy metal grindhouse kind of like sarcasm to them. So she picks up, it's just like frantic camera work at this point, her running and just like terrified. And another funny scene is when she's dragging Sue down the hall, running and dragging her down the stairs. it's just like the complete, when they go to having complete disregard for each other, it's actually kind of funny. But she opens the box and there is a card that says, "We are sorry you did not appreciate your experience with the substance." So backhanded. And there is a termination needle with black liquid in it. And as Elizabeth draws Sue's, sorry, getting all mixed up, Sue's arm back, she hears the substance voice again going, "Are you sure? Once you stop, you can't go back." And also, "Just on your own," repeats over. And I think that terrifies Elizabeth a lot also, is the being alone. She knows that, like, she has no option really at this point. This is all she has. So, but Elizabeth does stab the needle in and begins, but she stops about halfway, seeing all of the love and praise that Sue gets. Her mood kind of changes, and she begins to comfort Sue. And this is actually also kind of a really sad and endearing scene. She's like very gently telling her that she needs Sue. She needs to get ready. It's our big night. And trying to like give her CPR. She's screaming, "You have to come back." And blood starts to come out from Sue's nose. And Elizabeth runs into the bathroom, grabbing the switch tubing and inserting into herself and Sue. Nothing comes out of the tube, so Elizabeth stabs it into Sue's heart. And Sue springs awake, spitting blood into Elizabeth's face. This is such like a gooped gagged moment. You're just as shocked as I think both of them are that like, oh shit, they're both awake now. But yeah, they're both like shocked and afraid of each other. Sue sees the half-empty termination syringe and attacks Elizabeth. Also by this now, I'm just now noticing in the notes, her entire apartment is now pink. So like that pulling back the image, that was like the only real blue in the apartment. Sue kicks Elizabeth, sending her into that giant portrait of herself, and starts strangling her. That's when Elizabeth reaches over and smashes a vase over Sue's head and runs into the bathroom. Elizabeth is able to lock the door, but Sue begins to like frantically kick it, busting in and knocking Elizabeth over. Elizabeth stumbles to her feet, but Sue kicks her over again, knocking her into the sink where she hits her head. And Sue picks up Elizabeth. Now, this is a very bloody, gory scene. So, like, from here on out, it gets real gross. Sue picks her up, and they both pause as like we see them both in the mirror looking at each other, almost a little bit like the mirror phase experiment, like holding the baby up like, this is you, this is who you are. Sue begins to repeatedly smash Elizabeth's face into the glass mirror, basically just drops her bloody and struggling to live. Like, it's very gruesome. Elizabeth does try crawling into the living room, picks herself up, but she's very wobbly. Like, again, her face is beaten in. Sue kicks her, and Elizabeth flies across the entire room, landing on a table, which, like, when did we establish that Sue has, like, supernatural strength? And Sue basically kills off Elizabeth by kicking her to death repeatedly. Blood is splattering everywhere, but like you're thinking like, girl, you can't be doing this. You need each other. If she's dead, so are you. And then the "remember you are one" pops back up again. And Sue gets a very sudden pain, realizing what she has done, standing in Elizabeth's blood. She then sees the billboard, and it cuts to very quickly at the studio. Tech is running through hair and makeup, but Sue can hardly focus on anything. Harvey inspects her in her dress, saying it's perfect. She does look very pretty in the blue. Jewelry being placed on Sue as her hearing goes, and she begins coughing really hard. Like, we're starting to see her deteriorating. Then we are back in that Shining bathroom that we saw in the beginning with Elizabeth and Harvey. And Sue is hoarse, like very hoarse, like and she's heaving and spitting up teeth. There's just something about teeth. I hate it. I hate it. Something about teeth, and like specifically teeth just falling out. And Sue begins to break down, both like physically and mentally. She begins to pull her other front teeth out as tears are streaming down her face. Like they're just coming right out. And she gets called to stage right at the perfect moment. Sue gets the idea to activate the substance on herself to get someone even more perfect. And Sue makes her way to the stage. Here's Harvey shout at her from behind. Now, this is such an anxiety-inducing scene. Oh my god.
Sue?
Harvey insists on her meeting the shareholders as they all like eye her down eagerly. They're all these old guys. Sorry, that sounds mean, but they're these old creepy guys. They're all like looking over his shoulder at her, but they're also looking at her very suspiciously, like, oh, okay, what can this pretty little thing do? And you can see the fear in Sue's eyes as Harvey tells her to smile, which, like, okay, I understand the context of a man being like, oh, what's wrong, honey? Just smile. Or, you know, just something having to do with a smile. Like, it's a very backhanded comment. But it being used, like, in this context, knowing, like, what's really going on, her teeth are falling out, it just, like...
Is everything okay? So smile!
Almost like a good physical way to really make you feel how women feel in that moment. That, like, almost like shiver down your spine, like, oh. And she gives a very meek grin, and Harvey shouts, "All pretty girls should smile." Harvey's a very good caricature of just, like, the worst. And there's, like, a line of flamingo-esque dancers looking like the Vegas showgirls, kind of. They're in very scandalous kind of outfits. The execs and Harvey are like watching their behinds as they go by, and they like joyfully, like little kids, are running along behind them, following them. And then the camera switches to in POV, which I love these scenes. It's where we get like some of the highest tension. Sue is going into the elevator, and when she goes to press the button, her fingernail like falls off, folds back. Ugh, fingernails too. Nails and teeth, dog. And then we hear like the sound completely cut out, or it's like very now like muffled, almost like we're underwater. As we see something fall down her dress. And she reaches down and picks it up, and it's her ear, like that audio cue, genius mixed to the like confusion and then horror of finding out what it really was. Someone else then gets in the elevator and is talking, but Sue can hardly focus or hear anything. And of course, we can't really either. He's just kind of like mumbling. She then runs out of the studio through a back lot to her apartment. Now, like, she must have been living real close. It didn't look it, but her vision starts to blur. She is stripping down, taking off her dress and everything. Very elegant, over the top ballroom gown almost. She's running to the bathroom. She stumbles until she finds leftover activator still in the little bottle. And then it does show emphasis on the single use only. But Sue is frantic. She is begging for a better version of herself, and the process begins. It's almost like you get the same scenes from before, like that spinning light and other stuff. But now it's more visually distorted, like it's off. There's something very, very different about it. And then there is a zoom in on another one of those flaming interludes. This one's in the shape of a heart, and a distorted lens POV looking around the bathroom. There's very heavy labored breathing, and the first glimpse in the mirror is a major jump scare. Like, you know it's going to be bad, but you don't know by just like how much. It's crazy. And then it does a really cool shot where it like pans to the back, like looking at this creature's back, and you see Elizabeth's face protruding out of like the shoulder area. And like she's fully conscious. Then you get flashbacks again to the casting like call auditions of looks like everything's in the right place this time. And then she tries to speak, saying, but like in a very gargled voice, I'm, and then she pukes up the substance again. And that is when we get to the Monstro Elisasu title card. So that is the end of part 2. I know. We are going to do a part 3. That one is shorter. The Monstro Elisasu chapter. It's only a few pages of notes for me, so we're going to do that. It'll be a quick video, but in that we're also going to talk about that forum that I found with like, if the characters wore certain perfumes, what would it be? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the soundtrack vinyl as well. And actually, I'm probably going to be going to Vermont again. It's so much. So I'm going to get the VHS player and see if that's an actual VHS of it. If it is, the person that made that, it's actually a small time creator called Tyler's Tapes. I was able to buy it right on TikTok, which I like that because I can do Apple Pay and it's just so much faster. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about Substance vinyl soundtrack, my specific review on that, I guess. And yeah, keep an eye out for other stuff. I will post other videos in the meantime until we get part 3 out. But part 3 is surely not going to take me nearly as long. Thank you so much, you guys, for tuning on in. And thank you so much for your patience as well. Let me know your thoughts, like and subscribe, all of that. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Take care.